sorry, I have to call my agent.
You can go now.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, I want you to do more hair flips first.
Yeah.
There you go, okay.
Get that.
Did you get that?
We'll edit that out.
Oh, yeah, it's already going.
Okay, so, first of all, welcome to our new meeting spot. Thank you.
And a beautiful one it is.
It is, thank you very much. I'm glad you could all find it, and and that you all let the valets take your cars, okay? Because I had a little anxiety about that at first. Okay, so thank you. We want to get right to it. I have just a few housekeeping things. As you know, we invited Dennis Stein to come, and we actually changed the date to accommodate his schedule. We had a previous date set, and then he felt he couldn't do it. We were told because he had some other family commitment, so we changed the date to today. They accepted graciously. I sent out the email to all of you, and then a couple days ago, I got just a very abrupt email like I showed you.
Before you continue, there's music in the room. Is there any way of turning it off?
Oh, I thought we muted that.
Well, I can hear it pretty clearly.
Let's see.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no,
It is just.
it's okay.
You
We'll
just
get
cost-
there.
You just cost me a video edit, by the way.
Live
Somewhere.
What can I tell you? There may be something on the side of
Did I mute that?
No.
Yes.
No, Frank Sinatra's singing now.
Now I can still hear Frank Sinatra singing.
It's not that I don't like it.
I know, but we can't.
But separate from it. It must be exactly.
Roberta, better?
Well, it's
Can still hear it.
if you can't get it off, you can't get it off. There usually is an off switch.
There
but-
is. Let's see.
It's too loud.
Somebody else.
we could dance.
I don't want to compete with Frank Sinatra, because that for me is a losing battle unless you want me to sing, and then we can compete with, Bozo the Clown.
Well, I don't, it's there.
It's
Do you want,
it's
Marcia,
there.
do you want me to mention it to the people?
It's not as noisy over here.
Oh, wait a second.
She found it.
Aha.
There.
Don't play with
Glad
it.
you touched.
I did not get a PhD for nothing.
I don't have a PhD.
Okay, well, there you go.
That's fine.
Okay. So thank you all for coming. I appreciate really that you're here and that Ron is here. As I was saying, we invited Dennis Stein and he at the last minute bailed. I asked for a reason, never heard back. We have sent out to the candidates a self-administered questionnaire. Because the time was short, usually we do individual interviews with each candidate, but because the time was so short, we felt our due diligence process needed to be truncated also. And so we sent a questionnaire. We received one back from Ron. We did not receive one back from Zine. So I got a message late last night from his campaign strategist. He will have it over the weekend. We need to talk about that, whether or not we will accept it. Okay, so think about that, and as you're leaving, give me your thoughts on that. Okay? We have at the end of the discussion we're going to have with Ron, questionnaires for everyone to fill out. Lucy, I'm going to ask you to manage that process, please. It's self-explanatory. And just leave those before you leave, please. And then we will send out our newsletter, and I ask you to please circulate it to as many people as you can, because it will give information about the candidates. Okay? It will also go on our website. Thank you, Mike Eveloff. And for the mayoral forum, we loaded Mike loaded the newsletter on the website, and we had over 5,000 hits. So we think that had some impact on the number of votes that Kevin James got, because we were, very favorable towards him, and so we think that had some impact. And so we're really seeing that our coalition is a force within the community. Okay, so I want to thank Ron for keeping his commitment.
Great to be here.
And so this will be, I think, a shorter meeting. Catherine is our timekeeper. Thank you very much. Ron, when you see the red,
Okay,
time to stop.
all right.
Thank you. Is there anyone here who would like to take some short notes about what says? Oh, okay. Yeah, but then I have to transcribe them, and I don't want to do that. So, okay, Irene is not feeling well. She has allergies or something. Okay, all right. So then let's just get started. So, a variety of questions. Some came from you, some I made up, some, and I want to thank everybody who sent in questions. That was really helpful. So the first question is, Ron, what do you consider to be the most important aspect of the controller's job? You have 90 seconds.
Well, what most of the controller's staff is actually dedicated to is one of the things we talk about least, interestingly enough, and that is actually payroll and producing checks for the city of Los Angeles and payments that are made to vendors. But that's not actually what gets a lot of attention, and most of that is sort of a relatively pro forma process. Although there are improvements that I've recommended that can be made to save money and to improve the way that we make our payments and do our payroll. Having said that, there's a tremendous role that the controller plays in doing all sorts of audits, and these can be financial audits, they can be operational. It is about looking at what are best practices in other cities. It's about finding different ways to do things than we're doing it now. And we hear so much about the problems that we have, but there are solutions out there, and if you look at what other cities, other counties, what private industry is doing, you're going to find a lot of solutions. We don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything. And when it comes to the audits, it's not just about doing the audits, it's about the kind of recommendations that come out of it, and it's about seeing them implemented, because you can have the best recommendations, and they mean nothing if they are not implemented, which has happened way too much in the city of LA, and we can kind of get into some of the details of why that is not getting implemented and what I want to do to actually make sure that happens.
Okay. Good.
Oh, I was waiting for that
You
red.
finished it before you.
Okay,
got to
I'm
it.
trying to be proactive.
No, very good. Oh, we like that. Okay, so here's a question on finance.
Okay.
The city faces insolvency with an estimated deficit of $1 billion over the next 4 years. Describe 3 key things you would do as controller to help bring the city back to financial health.
Well, the city's got an awful lot of financial problems, although I don't think it's accurate to say that we are facing insolvency. When you look at insolvency or you look at bankruptcy, and I'm an attorney, not a bankruptcy attorney, but have also been involved with a lot of different businesses, you can end up filing for bankruptcy based on, for example, your lack of cash flow, or you can based on the fact that you just have liabilities that well exceed what your assets are. Now, the city has got an awful lot of assets, so we don't face insolvency per se. Now, that $1 billion is sort of an estimate of a shortfall that we have of roughly about $250 million a year that's projected. Actually, this year's shortfall has been brought down from about $250 million to maybe about $140 million, and it's called a shortfall as opposed to a deficit because we can't officially deficit spend the same way that the federal government can. We can't print money. And so every year we end up having a so-called balanced budget, but that is done with a combination of maybe asset sales or borrowing or a variety of other kinds of, sometimes even smoke and mirrors. Having said all of that, the actual shortfall that we have, I think, is much greater because that doesn't take into consideration the fact that we're not putting money into our infrastructure. It doesn't take into consideration the fact that we're not putting enough money into our pension funds. The real number is probably close to $1 billion a year. So, how do you get that done? Actually, if you look at the various recommendations that were put forward by the Commission on Revenue Efficiency that I had the chance to chair, and we were around for 18 months, we actually detail about $450 million a year in what we believe are really achievable savings, efficiencies, new revenues. I can get into details on all of these, but there are tremendous opportunities looking at the great assets that the city has that go underutilized. looking at our purchasing and procurement policies. We spend billions of dollars a year on goods and services. By the way, almost none of it with businesses in Los Angeles. And we also do a terrible job of collections. And we have to look at the 40% of our budget that actually comes from so-called intergovernmental transfers and how we improve that.
Okay, so, you mentioned about assets and selling our assets. Do you favor selling or privatizing the DWP, LAX, or the port to satisfy the deficit for city pensions?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in selling assets to pay for shortfalls in cash flow. That, I think, makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. That's one thing. The second is when I talk about the vast asset that the city has, it's about how you put them to good use. For example, we have potholes everywhere in the city of LA, but actually the city of LA actually owns 2 asphalt plants. We have an ownership interest in a third. People are really surprised when I say that, and they only operate at part capacity. We can be actually joint venturing. We can be selling more asphalt to other jurisdictions. We can be covering the cost of our employees, and that's just one example. We own thousands of acres of farmland in Kern County. The list goes on and on and on. When it comes to DWP and when it comes to the airports, when it comes to these proprietary departments that we're talking about in the port port particularly is actually a source of great economic strength for the city and for the county of Los Angeles. And I'm not in favor of selling off these kind of assets. I am in favor of how do we use them in a much better way, and how do we really rein in some of the incredible costs, particularly when it comes to DWP, which then end up translating into higher rates. And that also is not just bad for the homeowner, that's also really bad for businesses, which then find it less attractive to do business in LA.
The city has used special restricted funds to artificially prop up the reserve fund, not the least of which is the fire hydrant installation and main replacement trust fund. As the city's watchdog, what actions will you take regarding this situation? Can you tell us in about 30 seconds?
Sure. The city actually has hundreds of special funds for a variety of different things. Everything from fire hydrant fund to other very specific ones. And part of the problem is actually even keeping track of exactly where we are moment by moment on those funds. Because if you want to know where we are on them, it's really tough to actually get an exact answer. One of the things I want to do as controller is make sure that on a moment-by-moment basis, you actually are able to track what's there and see that the money is being spent for that which it is supposed to be spent. Having said that, we have had a somewhat of a good increase in our reserve fund. Some of it artificial, some of it real.
Okay. Now I want to just ask a question on audits.
Mm-hmm.
This is a yes or no question.
Okay.
This is sort of a lightning round. Will you conduct a complete audit of LADWP?
Yes, and not only will I, but I am actually required by law to do so, because the Administrative Code of the City of Los Angeles, Section 266, actually sets out 3 specific audits that the controller must do a minimum of every 5 years. It's the Industrial and Economic Survey and Administrative Survey, and you have to do one for each of the proprietaries, including DWP, and that's coming right up, and it's top on the list because I don't want to be in violation of the law for not having completed it.
Okay. So in this audit, will you look at specific elements such as the salaries paid to the IBEW Local 18 members as identified in the August 2012 PC consulting report?
I think you have to look at everything when it comes to this. Having said that, this particular kind of audit, which is the one that is required by law, has certain kinds of things that are supposed to be in it and certain things that are not supposed to be in it. But there's a lot that you can put in there, and I think those have to be there because it affects absolutely everything, and it affects the operations of DWP in very profound ways.
Okay. Will you examine the LADWP budget and the rate increases relative to the continuing shift to green power?
Absolutely. And look, this is also now being done by the, there was of course a ballot measure, and we now also have an independent look over the DWP, but there's a role that the controller has to play in looking at this.
What will you do to make all this information more transparent to the public? 60 seconds.
Well, a lot of it is about technology and about putting it onto the website and making it as available as possible. A lot of this information actually is there on the website of the city in one place or another, but you need to really study all the places and all the ways that you can search and all the ways that you can find that information. Some of it does require public records requests. Some of it may not be available online. I'm going to seek to put as much of it as online as possible. Having said that, I can't claim that everything will be online or that it will all be on the controller's website. There are not unlimited resources, but it's about putting the most important stuff on.
So let me ask, what can the controller's office do to motivate and excite people to want to have more understanding about these issues, about these audits?
Well, I think it's a multi-part answer to that. Part of it is people will get very involved, let's face it, when they're upset about something. And people are upset about the finances of the city, especially when they see it manifest in the fact that things are not being fixed. And when they see their DWP bills go up and up and up and up. And look, there's a natural increase in rates, and that's the nature of the years going by. And also, we are going to have to pay additional costs in order to really get more green, and there are a variety of reasons that we need to. Having said that, what we have to look at is whether it has really gone over the top in terms of how these rates are being applied. And the more that people actually see their bottom line affected, the more that they get interested and involved. The other part of it is making people feel, and not just feel, but making people know that if they do get involved, that what they do will make a difference. As opposed to, people often feel, I think we all do sometimes, that we raise a lot of holy heck about stuff, and then nothing gets done, and that turns people off. So it's showing that actually results can be achieved.
Okay, so this next question is on investigations.
Yep.
Section 217B of the city charter gives subpoena power to the controller, who can then examine witnesses under oath and compel the attendance of witnesses and the production of evidence before them. Would you use this power, and under what scenario? Give me a 90-second answer.
Actually, I believe that that is a provision that's in the city administrative code and not in the charter, if I'm not mistaken. Having said that, absolutely, I think that the controller has to do everything possible to gather information. Look, you can often get it by really cooperating with departments and working with them and making them feel that you're going to actually try to help in the challenges that they face. And if that doesn't work, then you use shame, and if that doesn't work, then you can compel. But this is something actually that can be done really with the city attorney's office at its best, because if you're looking to do subpoenas and you are doing it totally on your own and not also working with the city attorney's office, you can have a bunch of problems legally. So you've got to cooperate with that, I think.
Okay, would you use subpoena power regarding LADWP? Because the union is often less willing to come forth and be straightforward.
I don't know that the problem is a lack of information. I think it's a lack of what we're doing with that information. Going and subpoenaing a bunch of documents when we, quite frankly, we know what things are costing. We have all sorts of reports that are out there that detail exactly what the money is being spent for and what the various costs are. Subpoenaing is not necessarily, in and of itself, going to give us a lot more information. It's the question is, what are you going to do with that information? And a lot of it has been facing folks in the city council. They've been doing nothing about it. So having more of it will not necessarily change that. You got to make them do something.
Okay. So in section 217A1, and I thought it was the city charter, it may be the administrative code, it says that the controller is responsible for ascertaining the salary of municipal court judges and for setting and adjusting the salaries of elected officers. The judges' salaries are set by law. But given that the city is in an economic crisis, would you encourage the mayor and members of city council to refuse to take all or part of their salaries?
Look, the salaries, as you mentioned, are determined by and are linked to what it is that the Superior Court judges make. And that's not anything that needs great determination by a city controller or by anybody else. That's public record and really easily available. I think that right now, during the situation that we have right now, that there are a lot of different ways that people who are in elected office ought to be saving the city money. And by the way, the amount of salaries that are collected by, say, the city council members are just a small little part. There's also all these funds that they have that are spent on a variety of things, some of them worthy, some of them much less than worthy, and they have great control over those funds. There have been proposals to kind of take most of that money away, and most of those proposals have been met with a stone wall by the city council members, needless to say, who want to keep control over it. So that the salaries, even if you were to eliminate every single one of those city council salaries, which might be a nice idea, on certain days of the week, are not going to go a very long way toward fixing the problems that we have. But it's about setting an example.
Okay, so that's one thing, setting an example. Then what will you do regarding all these, I won't call them slush funds, but some of them are pretty close to slush funds. So what can you as controller do to illuminate that problem to the public and help city council members see a better path of behavior?
Well, part of what we have is a very balkanized system when it comes to the 15 council districts in the city of LA. And everybody who is in office as a council member, they want to control their district when it comes to planning, when it comes to what gets repaved, when it comes to a whole variety of different things. Look, these funds, which on some ways are slush funds, on the other hand, there are also ways that certain kinds of community benefits can be actually put in place. They're a way to short circuit some of the bureaucracy that otherwise exists in the city. They're a way that a member of council can actually say, okay, I'm going to take a certain amount of money and I'm going to get this done because we just can't seem to get enough response out of the Bureau of Street Services or what have you. So there are pluses and minuses to that. The question is whether it's really a purview of that council member to decide how money gets spent for paving streets, or whether it ought to be based on the more central planning of the Bureau of Street Services and of other departments. There's a plus and a minus to both. And I think we need to really make it clear and available for all to see in a much better way just how that money gets spent, and then the people can decide what they think that money is being spent for and whether it's being well spent or not.
Okay, so in section 262B, in the event of abuse within a city office or department, the controller has the authority to take over a city department. That is to suspend the department's own authority for operating, and then the controller's office assists that department to achieve adequate controls and standards prior to the reinstatement of the authority of that office or department. Given the findings from previous audits, it's been said that the Department of Building and Safety seems to be a possible candidate for this action.
Yes.
Would you have the, whatevers to use your authority to take over building and safety in its controls and operations and so forth?
It's one thing to have
Wait a minute, 90 seconds.
90 seconds, okay.
The question was 90 seconds.
It's one thing to have the authority to do something. It's altogether another thing to have the knowledge, the expertise, and the resources to do something like that. Because if you say, and look, it is definitely there in the law, but let's say that even was to be exercised, and let's even say that it was a legal exercise of that right. Well, then you better have, as a controller, the actual resources to take over all of the operations and accounting and finances of a department. And with the kind of staff that the controller's office has, it would be potentially even more disastrous than whatever else might be going on right now.
So what would you do?
Now there are a number of audits that have been done of what's happening in building and safety. Although it should be noted that what this particular provision relates to are some very specific financial issues that may be going on in a particular department, as opposed to, say, operational issues. And as you also know, there's now been a proposal that has been put out there for a merger of, or for some sort of alliance in a new way between building and safety and planning and some other departments. And I just got a copy of that actually in the last few days. I'm going to be studying that real carefully. I think everybody in this room ought to be doing the same thing to look at what that's actually going to mean from a financial and an operational point of view.
Ann, did you have a question?
Just a follow-up on your question, Ron. The
It's pretty extreme, even though there's a provision for that in the law. I've been trying to find if there was ever an example of that. I have not actually found that that has ever occurred.
Well, there is an example of the federal government coming in and taking over the police department. I mean, there are examples of some body of authority coming over, relieving the local authorities of their responsibilities to get a department in shape.
Usually that involves a federal court stepping in.
Right,
Civil
and there were
rights
reasons for
action.
that, but, so nothing is always, things are the same, but they're always different. So I guess the question is, if this scenario should occur, and building and safety has been problematic for years, and a re-engineering of the organization, may or may not work because you still have all the same players. And so to what extent is that sort of, just not really pulling the covers off the issues and the problems and the people that have been running that place? I'm not talking about the GM necessarily, but the people that do the day-to-day, the civil service.
In the final analysis, the buck when it comes to department managers and to what they do and don't do is really with the mayor's office. It's the mayor that hires, it's the mayor that fires. It is not the controller that does that. And even if theoretically you were able to have the controller's office, say, take over the accounting of a particular department, that again does not change the players in that department. So
But
there are a lot of reasons.
Put people on notice.
Yes, but even if theoretically you were able to do that, you better sure as heck be able to do something better than has been done there, and to just take over a department. That's first of all not what that provision of the law really provides for. It's really more about the accounting practices of that department than anything else. But even that is not going to really transform a department. The buck's got to stop with the mayor when it
Yeah,
comes to
well,
that.
Eduardo's from Chile, so we're into coup d'etats. Okay, Roberta, then Ann, and then we'll move on.
Yes, just a generalized question about the authority. The last two ladies who were controllers, and they were ladies, Laura Chick and Wendy Gruhl, who's still the controller, have issued audit after audit after audit. And as somebody who sat on the school board for 14 years, I've received a lot of reports, and most of them gone on the back shelf. Realistically, let's just assume that everything that Wendy says she found is true, and everything Laura says she found is true. What is the power, or is it just a bully pulpit power that you have as the controller's office to make and affect those changes, regardless of who's in there?
That, I think, is the most fundamental question when all is said and done, and it's the one that I hear the most often. So I'm going to give you a couple layers of answers to that. And I'll give you an actual example of the way that I deal with things. There's been audit after audit, for example, of parking operations and the parking occupancy tax, that 10% that you and I pay, and then that money just disappears into the ether instead of getting forked over to the city of LA. And it costs us a tremendous amount of money. The Commission on Revenue Efficiency, when I was its chair, what we did for the first time actually, is we brought together 3 different entities that each had a role in these parking operations. The Office of Finance, the City Attorney's Office, and the Police Commission. And each, believe it or not, have had their own administrative hearing process of one aspect or another of the parking operations. And so you have these parking operators who are able to do something wrong and then have one administrative hearing process, but then have a totally different one with a different entity in the city. And for the first time, there's now actually a task force that's been brought together to actually work on this. So that's number one. Number two is there have been all these proposals of what can be done to go after them after the fact. What I proposed, which I think is probably the most simple of proposals, is that there be an ordinance that requires them to take debit and credit cards, and eventually also to take cell phone payments, so that that money can be just electronically tracked, and so that that money then can go directly to the city. And that's going to make a big difference. So it's not just about a bully pulpit. I think it's about how you craft your recommendations, how you bring people actually into the same room to get them done.
Ann, did you have something?
Just to ask, with the 2 candidates that are running for mayor, how would you work with them? And do you feel that that would be an important, depending on who gets elected, that would be an important role for you personally in your relations with these people?
I actually really good relationship with both of the people who are now in the general election for mayor, both Garcetti and Gruhl. And look, there are times when the controller is going to be at odds with other officers of the city, no question. And it's going to be at odds with the department, it's going to be at odds with the mayor, with the city attorney's office, with city council members. But there also is a time when I think it really helps to have a cooperative relationship as well. And I do have a good relationship with them. And I think that will be an important part of actually getting things done.
As controller, how will you involve community leaders from homeowner and residents groups? Oh, you got 90 seconds.
90 seconds. Well, I think that it's important that you really get input from everybody everywhere. Of course, it can't be absolutely unlimited. Nothing ever is in life. But a couple things that I want to do. Given the fact that you don't have unlimited resources, quite frankly, in the office of the controller, it's about how do you also bring in outside experts. And so I want to have a whole panel of experts. For example, when I'm doing a report about parking operations, I want to actually bring together all these various stakeholders who have something to do with parking operations and who have expertise and understanding of it. And the same is true in doing audits relating to housing. The same is true for audits relating to building and safety. If you're going to do a building and safety audit, for example, or a planning department, you should bring together those who have a stake in it, which are members of the community, people who are also in the development community, people who really have a lot of stake and involvement in what occurs, so that you can actually get an idea of how this is going to affect people on the street and in real life, as opposed to sort of in theory. And when it comes to anything that I think has an impact, which is just about anything, on people who are residents of the city, they have to have a voice. And they have expertise, they have something to add, they have good ideas. And we ought to be listening and doing something about it.
Oh, Mike, did you have?
I do. Ron, how do you feel about preferential parking? And because there's a certain amount of friction sometimes between business communities and residential communities. How do you feel about preferential parking, and should businesses be allowed to purchase permits in preferential parking areas?
Well, you're asking about sort of a planning issue, and the role of the controller is not so much to say, here's how I feel about a particular issue, but to look at the financial aspects of it. And so the appropriate role that I would see having is looking at what are the costs and what are the benefits that we might be able to get out of it financially. If we were to have the ability for businesses to buy these permits, how would we set it up? What would it cost? What would it generate for the city? What other options might there be? What kind of burdens does it impose on the community? Because I think that, and I get these questions a lot in terms of how do I feel about something. And I got a lot of feelings about a lot of stuff. But the controller's role, if I'm going to be effective, is to not so much operate based on how I feel about something, but to come up with the most accurate kind of series of measurements and numbers so that those who actually get a vote, such as the city council and those who have the biggest stake in what happens, which are people who are living in our city, actually have the real numbers in front of them as opposed to guesswork, which is what we operate on way too much of the time.
Can I flip it a little bit to be a controller question?
Sure.
Okay.
Please.
The charges for preferential permits have gone up and up and up, and we have tried to find out what the real cost of providing the service is. For instance, day permits cost $3 for each permit.
Mm-hmm.
How will you attack that problem?
Well, look, these kinds of fees are supposed to reflect what the actual cost of operation is. It's not supposed to be a profit-making operation of the city when it comes to these kinds of fees that are imposed by the city. And I have not actually looked in depth in terms of what the actual cost of running that operation is. But let's even for a moment assume that it is reflective of the cost of running that operation. That's step one. Step two is to say, well, is that a reasonable cost for that operation? And especially in a time nowadays when we have so much technology, if you want to, let's say, get a ticket to a big sporting event, you can go online, you put your credit card, and you can, on your laser printer, print something that is a barcode. we need to really get with it when it comes to technology in the city of LA and provide that same kind of simple ability for people, let's say when it comes to a preferential parking permit or a day permit, to do the exact same thing. I mean, the idea of having to go down to the office and get it is so 20th century.
Thanks.
Okay, so what are your top, just very quickly, tick them off, what are your top 3 priorities for the controller's office?
The first is, I think, to really take stock of the of those audits that are currently underway, because there's going to be a transitional period, and you want to know what's happening and how to complete those. I really also want to take stock of those who are doing the audits themselves, because most of the audits actually are not done by those who are working for the City of LA. They're done by outside consulting firms. And are those that we are picking necessarily the best ones to be doing particular kinds of audits? A CPA has a very specific kind of perspective on certain kinds of financial auditing. But when we're looking at performance audits, when we're looking at how do you do things better, how do you compare ourselves to what another city is doing, you perhaps need another kind of expertise. And so I think if we want to have the right kind of audits with the right kind of results and recommendations, we want to have the right people doing them. I'm kind of addressing all the various operational things that we're talking about.
So what else are your top 3 priorities?
Well, I think that it is absolutely necessary to look at where the biggest bucks are, and that's what I want to be having as my focus. I talked about some of the assets that we have in the city that can be put to much better use. Procurement, this is a huge issue, and I think that the controller can make a big difference. It's a Byzantine system when it comes to the city of LA and how we buy goods and services. And a lot of money goes down the drain and can be much, much better used. I want to look at construction costs in the city. Actually, there was a survey that was done of construction projects down at the port, and there were 5 different construction projects that collectively went $100 million over budget. And you ask yourself, how does something like that happen? Is it waste? Is it fraud? Is it abuse? And in my review of it, it's really not so much about those things as about inertia and about stupidity and about the way that we put things out to bid in the city of LA. And so the role of the controller is not just being the one to go after the waste, fraud, and abuse, although there's plenty of it, but how do you really change the way that we approach doing business in the city?
Okay, so this next question is on governance.
Okay?
First, it's 2 parts. First, what are the 3 most important leadership characteristics for the controller of Los Angeles?
3 most important leadership characteristics. Number 1, I think it is to be honest. Number 2, I think it is to be very detail-oriented. And number 3, I think it is to be a good listener. And then what ties all these things together is that I see a lot of people who run for office, and often they fall into 2 categories. One is, what can the job do for me? And the other is, what can I do for the job? Admittedly, everybody who runs for public office has got to have a little bit of ego involved. But the reality is you want people in public office who are really looking at what can I do for the job. And that's what I think I bring to this. My opponent has been somebody who's been in office for 12 years and is looking for another job. And it's controller that I really want to be. This is the job I really want. It's not that I want this so that I can go on to something else or because I'm looking for something else to do.
Okay, so you mentioned be honest, be detailed, and be a good listener.
Yep.
Now, you might think that the next question is, do you have these attributes? But that is not the next question.
Okay.
The next question is, how would you leverage these attributes in this job? That's my question.
I like that question, actually. Look, it's absolutely essential, I think, that the numbers that the controller puts out are ones that people can look at and say, all right, these are honest and straightforward. There are times when various interest groups are going to agree with a finding or are going to disagree, and they may like me or dislike me as a result. But at least I want everybody to always be able to say those numbers were honest and that they were accurate. When it comes to being detailed, it is the devil that is in the details, but also sometimes the angels that are in the details. And you look at various kinds of contracts that the city has, And only when you really get into the details of it do you understand why it's working or why it's not working. Or you look at a particular operation, and only when looking at those details do you get why something has gone wrong, or for that matter, occasionally something has gone right. So I think that that's how I would leverage it.
Okay. You were mentioning some applications of technology for the
Mhm.
office and for the city. Can you give us one or two other examples?
Oh yeah, I can give you a long list. So, interestingly enough, actually at one of the
Give me 30
CD5
seconds.
HOAs meetings, there was actually a mayoral candidate who talked about how we had cutting-edge technology for 1982. And I think that there's so much truth to that. First of all, when you look at, let's say, the parking lots, there is no reason why we can't have a much more electronic system for tracking money, for allowing people to pay. I can imagine a time in the not-too-distant future where, for example, every smartphone will be able to pay for parking both in private lots as well as in city facilities and city meters, where each one is assigned a particular number. You punch in that number, that money is taken out of your account, and that's it. There are all of these different ways that we can use smartphone technology, GPS technology. Actually, there's a truck called the Pothole Killer, which I was watching a YouTube video of, which actually is an all-in-one machine to essentially fix potholes, but it also is hooked up to a GPS device that tracks every single pothole in a city and is allowing it to be able to know when is it going to fail, comparing how its performance and materials are comparing to other kinds of potholes in other areas. You're able to take this info and grind it into a variety of ways. I'm going to add one more thing to this, which is there's been so much talk about, for example, the performance of fire department when it comes to response time. But go figure, do you know that our fire trucks do not have GPS devices? There are some fire trucks where you've got firemen and firewomen who are actually working with a Thomas guide or using their own phone. This is simple technology, which many of us have in our vehicles today. There's no reason in the world why we can't put it into a fire truck, and it needs to be there.
So, on the item that you were talking about, the potholes, are you suggesting that we apply the learnings that we have, let's say from Deming on statistical process control, where you are measuring things before they fail in order to know how to fix them so they won't fail?
You said that very well. Because it's not just about going out there and fixing it after it has failed. And by the way, it's more expensive to do so. But you can predict when it's likely to fail based on a whole variety of factors. And if you have that data, you can save yourself money.
Okay, Lucy?
I want to follow up on the pothole as an example, but I want it to be an example for everything that's going on in the city. In the instance of pothole fixing, whether they know where they are and whether they're fixing them really isn't the issue as far as I'm concerned. It's whether they're fixing them appropriately. And I had a conversation with a crew that was fixing them in our neighborhood, and I stopped to thank them because literally they were fixing crevices. And the guy said, well, you know, it'd be helpful if you'd call your councilman, and I laughed because of course I had an ongoing conversation with the councilman. And he said, you know that the minute it rains, these are going to wash out.
Oh, yeah.
This, as controller, and I look to you as the person that's going to really fix things, is a waste of money. You're putting good money after bad when you know the way to fix it is to repave the street if you have crevices that are this big. And we all know that when it rains, they do wash out, and you're right back to where you started. So whether they can GPS where the potholes are really isn't the issue. The issue is oversight. And what I want to know is, as controller, because you did it in your commission, and I don't know the name of the commission.
Commission on Revenue
Right.
Efficiency.
Why there is so little oversight in this city, so that on the off chance that we do have an investigative reporter, we find out that, you know, Nunez is putting money in his bank account. and
Okay,
this
what's
guy-
the question here, Lucy?
How do we get adequate oversight so that we can do 1 trillion audits, but if nothing happens as a result of them, I don't care how many audits we do.
Okay.
What are we going to do about them?
Question was, how do you get oversight? If you want to give me 90 seconds for this question.
No, longer.
There are a couple of answers that I have to that. First of all, one of the things that I did with the Commission on Revenue Efficiency is we took every single one of our recommendations and we put them into a matrix. And what we did is we created a chart so that it could be charted exactly what happens month after month, actually quarter after quarter, in terms of whether there's been implementation, what the level of implementation has been, and what's left to do, what is the next department or the next city official that has to have something having to do with it so that you can actually track it. And by the way, there's great software to do these things as well. Anybody who builds a building, anybody who does a major kind of project has software to actually track exactly what deadlines are and where things are and payments, etc. The city uses very little of that kind of software. And we need to use a lot more of that. Not that technology in and of itself is the answer, but it helps definitely create transparency. And that's the kind of thing that I want to be using much more of, not just in the controller's office, but that I want to see it applied to every single department. There are a lot of other reforms that I think we need when it comes to follow-up. Eventually, I think the whole council file system in the city needs to be completely reformed because it's, to me, an impediment in many ways to keeping track of things. But again, that's another subject.
So I just want to confirm, you would use technology to track the implementation of motions passed by city council?
Look, I don't have the resources necessarily to track every single motion and
Well,
to
key
track
motion.
every single thing. And there is some of that already there on the city's website when it comes to being able to subscribe to council files, etc. But it's not a good system in my opinion. But for those things that I think that are most important, and particularly for the audits, I want to track in real time what the performance is. And by the way, it's not just a question, you've got some of that on the controller's website right now, of whether something's been implemented or partially implemented. But to me, that's not enough. I want more detail about exactly where we stand with certain things and what's left to do.
Yeah, I think what we're feeling is that there should be the application of technology to track the accountability of city workers who are supposed to fulfill certain tasks. And so they have to be accountable.
Everybody needs to be accountable,
Okay.
up and down. And again, technology in and of itself is not going to solve all the problems, but it begins to help when it comes to that. And it's also, I think, a culture, and this is the harder thing to do, is to change the culture at City Hall to a culture of accountability, a culture of how do you save money, how do you do more with less. Right now, especially the way that things are budgeted, if you're a department manager and you can find a way to do things with less money, then what will happen to you if you do that? The next year, you may very well just be punished in the next budget cycle. And you have to find ways to completely change that reward system. And that's not an easy task either, and not one that the controller can do in and of themselves, but we have to have that conversation.
Okay, so this next question is on infrastructure. Earlier this year, city leaders seemed surprised that after cutting $56 million from the LAFD budget, the fire department had poor performance in their response times. Furthermore, city leaders were unaware that for years response time statistics have been misreported. So as controller, what will you do to ensure that the information on fire department response times, police response times, is actually true and accurate?
Well, there was a tremendous...
90 seconds.
90 seconds, wow. It's not just a question of overall performance. We talked a lot about that. But I was and continue to be interested in even much more detailed information. For example, what is the performance in certain areas that are adjacent to the county or adjacent to another city? What is the performance in hillside areas versus areas of the flats? What is the performance in areas that are perhaps a little bit more isolated? Because just to say overall performance numbers, to me, is not enough. I want to know in detail, because then you'll begin to understand where certain cutbacks have or have not had an impact when it comes to performance. That's number one. Number two, again, as I mentioned, the issue of, let's say, the GPS devices. Simple kind of thing that fire department has been asking for a long time that could could really actually help save lives and save time, especially at night, especially in hills, when it's raining, when it's foggy. Another simple kind of device that many of these vehicles can have is a transponder, similar to what you have on buses that are on the major boulevards. Because right now, when they are going through red lights, which they have the right to do, they often mostly stop through those lights because they know people have their windows up, they're blasting their stereos, and they don't want to get into a car accident. And if you have the transponder that actually will change the light, that allows them to actually go through that light and do it more quickly. And that also improves performance and response time. So part of it is about tracking it. Part of it is about keeping track of those numbers, but also about really looking at the opportunities to turn things around with less money.
Okay. Mike?
I gotta talk about the fire department. This is a really great example of where the actual method used for doing the reporting to the city was intentionally faulty.
Focus.
It was faulty. This is the kind of thing where the controller's office has to put in and be intimately involved with knowing how the statistics are generated, not just reporting them.
Exactly.
So, tell me how you would get intimately involved in the fire department.
Well, your question is a really interesting one in terms of what is the measurement of response time, or the measurement of anything else for that matter, okay? And you can look at what other cities, other counties, other jurisdictions use in terms of various measurements that they have. Because it's the question, the measurement of from the time that the phone call comes in, is the measurement from the time that the call operator actually dispatches it? Is it from the time that the call operator is so-called finished with taking their report? Because a big part of the problem also, as you know, were reports that took an awfully long time to get before that dispatch is even made. So there are various ways that you can measure what that response time is, and each of them have some sort of validity. But it's a question of looking at what other places are doing that provide some of the most useful information and what are some of those best practices. And also, we have to realize we call the fire department, but in reality, it's really the emergency response department. It's really about paramedic calls much more so than it is about fire department calls. And that's something that has to be, that we're talking about in terms of measurement. Hello, Mr. City Attorney. How are you?
Hi, Nuge.
Rhonda, let me just make one point. Just
Sure.
so everybody knows, on the emergency calls, while 80% of all incidents are EMS, actually more man-hours are spent on fire, which was not obvious. And you need surge capacity
Yes.
at fire departments in order to put out fires.
Exactly.
So the focus on the EMS was sort of another one of those little tricks that the fire department tried to pull, and the mayor tried to pull, when saying we're going to add a couple ambulances 10 hours a week.
Okay, what's the...
The question is, again, how do you dig down deep into how these numbers are being put together? I'm not talking about the outcome, I'm talking about the accounting. How do you do that?
I think you've got to sit down with everybody who's in that department, number one. Number two, you bring in, again, outside experts and people who know a lot about the subject. And not just a question of the consulting company or the auditors that you hire to actually look at those numbers, but a whole variety of different people who form a full panel of people who know a lot more about emergency response time and about how to calculate it than, quite frankly, I would know, or that any controller would know. But by bringing in those experts, you really figure out how you're going to get those best measurements.
Okay, okay, we need to move on, so we're going to open the floor for questions, so you can come back to this. Because I do want to get to some campaign issues. I want to welcome our city attorney, who I had no idea was coming, but welcome.
Had a free morning, so
Okay.
breakfast with my wife or you.
A free morning.
You're always welcome in our group, so thank you for coming. Let me just ask a few campaign questions.
Sure.
Okay. The American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees District Council 36, which is the Los Angeles Labor Union for city workers, supports your candidacy.
Yes.
Constituents are concerned that this union, or special interest support, might and stymie your criticism of city departments and agencies. Will you here now pledge that in execution of your responsibilities as controller, you will not give special treatment to any special interest group?
Absolutely pledge that. But let's face it, every single interest is a special interest. That's the reality. City workers have an interest, our community has an interest, every single union has a different interest in the city of Los Angeles, and many of them are often at odds with each other. But I can tell you this, when I issued a whole series of reports of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency, and in the work that I do as president of the Quality and Productivity Commission, I have pulled no punches. Anybody who looks at those reports knows that that is the case. There have been applications that we take, for example, the Quality and Productivity Commission for departments that say we want an award for X or Y or Z, and we've gotten back to them with an explanation of exactly why they're not getting one, sometimes much to their consternation. So I call them as I see them, and I'll continue to do so.
Okay, so here's another question on campaign.
Yep.
In your self-administered questionnaire, we asked a question about laundered funds in any previous campaigns. And you said 2 years ago when you ran for city council, you learned that 2 contributors who had contributed to various other city campaigns were wrongfully reimbursed by their company for the contributions. When this came to light, the contributors returned the reimbursements to the company and the company was fined. The City Ethics Commission specifically noted that my campaign, your campaign, had no knowledge of the wrongful reimbursement and the matter was closed. However, in the ethics code, I guess it is, somewhere in the city, and maybe you can tell me, I think it's the ethics code or it's campaign methods. It says that in the event it is discovered by a candidate or committee treasurer that a contribution has been received in violation of subsection K, I think it is, the candidate or treasurer shall promptly pay the amount received in violation of the subsection to the city treasurer for deposit into the general fund of the city. So my question is, did you return those funds?
No, I did not, and I'll tell you exactly why. Because
You got 60 seconds.
the law actually was one which would have created a problem for me if I did so. It was actually 2 years after the fact that I learned that there were 2 contributors who actually got reimbursed by their employer, which is wrong, but there's no way that a candidate can know that. And actually, these particular donors had given to a number of different campaigns. And what they were forced to do is to return that money, which kind of undid that whole transaction. That was part of them being forced to return the money, which they did, and also to be fined, which they did. So these are called so-called laundered contributions, but in reality they are contributions that are reimbursed by somebody else, which is not supposed to happen. We today make sure, the best of our ability, that that does not happen, because we have an affidavit that it should be signed by each contributor saying, I'm promising that the contributions that I'm making have not been reimbursed by anybody else. We have to take their word for it. But if they are still giving that contribution, they are lying to us. So we did everything that we were supposed to do. I've had no issue ever with city ethics or anybody else over this, and it's done.
I think that puts it to rest.
Yeah, I do too.
Enough already.
Okay. As controller, how would you reorganize the controller's office? Please tell us what new positions you would initiate and what positions would you eliminate. You got 60 seconds.
That depends on how much money the city council gives me, among other things.
Well, let's assume we have the same budget.
Something that our city attorney knows a little bit about. Well, the reality is that most of the people who are working for the controller's office, as I mentioned, we talk a lot about the audits, but most of the people who are there are about payroll and about their producing checks and payments for the city of Los Angeles. So that's something that is mostly in place. It can be tweaked, it can be improved. But when you look at the audits that are done, that's largely about the choices that are made from outside contractors. And I'm going to take a very good look at which those outside contractors are and whether they're the ones that are giving us the best value and giving us the best kind of advice. So that's number one. Number two is that there are a lot of people who are working for controller's office as well as for other departments that are part of civil service. So you have to work around those civil service rules as best as you can to make sure that you have everybody who's in the right position at the right time for what they're doing.
Okay, I have two more questions
Yep.
left, and then I'm going to open up the
Can
floor.
I
for
just ask a
questions.
follow-up question? How many people can you directly appoint?
Well, it's not a very long list because the overwhelming majority of those who are working for the Controller's Office are there as part of the civil service staff. So when all is said and done, you're talking about maybe a dozen up to potentially 20, but that's an optimistic number.
Okay, so here are my last two questions, then I'm going to open it up, and I think you have some questions. Rayford, Beverly, did you have some
That's a good
questions for Ron? Okay.
Wait till you.
Okay. And then we'll open up to everybody. And then Nuch, if you want to say a few words after that, that's fine with me. So, okay, so the one question is on parking and finance. The Special Parking Revenue Fund was set up to acquire or to construct parking facilities, but these funds have been diverted to offset general fund expenses. As controller, what would you do to ensure that designated funds are used for their designated purposes, regardless of the city's debt problem?
This is something actually that we touched on a little bit before. There is an accounting for every single one of these special funds. Actually, I even brought a copy of it with me and a whole list of every single one of them. But it's a question of how do you keep track of that money much more in real time as opposed to after the fact. And also building into that system not just whether the balance is up or down, but exactly what that money got spent on and whether there are certain deadlines for spending that money. Now, when it comes to these special funds, particularly for parking, this is really needed in certain neighborhoods that are really suffering because there isn't enough parking for the businesses. The businesses suffer, our revenues suffer, but then also the neighbors suffer because they can't find a parking space in front of their own home, something that Diana knows a little bit about. So the essential thing is to be able to really keep track of it and make sure that the money is being spent where it is supposed to be spent and not just diverted. Having said that, there are certain legal times when that money can be not diverted, but it can be put into other uses or can be borrowed against, etc. And if that's going to be done, it has to be done in the right way.
But I have a question. What will the controller, you as controller, do when someone on city council or city council votes to move money out of a specially designated fund to the general fund so that city council looks good and, and has to run the city? What will the controller do? What will you do as controller?
Well, they're going to do that if they have the legal right to do so. So if they don't have the legal right to do so, then they're going to have an issue with the city attorney's office, and they're going to be either operating completely against the advice of the city attorney, or it's something that was permitted for them to do. But assuming, let's say, that it is permitted, it's up to the controller, if that is something that I believe was done inappropriately, to bring that to light.
Okay, Mike,
Will you say no?
that you won't transfer those funds? Will you
If
say?
somebody says, we're gonna take the money from the fire hydrant fund, and we don't get to see the opinions of the city attorney because it's attorney-client privilege.
Some of it is, some of it isn't, but
Most of it.
But or they try to move, they move $30 million from the fire hydrant fund. They moved hundreds of millions of dollars out of the parking fund. The question is, will you say no?
where I have a legal right to say no, and where I believe that it is being done against the law, then yes, I will. But the controller doesn't necessarily have that power to just say, no, that money is going to be totally withheld, and that money cannot be transferred. Because the controller has a role, certainly, over a lot of the transfers that are made, but cannot necessarily just stop that kind of a transfer from being made. Sometimes yes, sometimes no.
Okay.
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Will you do something that the present controller hasn't done, and that is to inquire on your own of the city attorney for an opinion as to that transfer, and then you would be my client, and I would be able to give you a separate opinion, which I would believe would be consistent with any further opinion. And then knowing that I cannot sue my own client, what they're doing is perhaps illegal, you could avoid the transfer because their conduct was ultra-virus.
Absolutely. I think that you're raising a very important issue, and it's a great question, actually, by our city attorney. Because there has to be, I think, cooperation between the controller's office and the city attorney's office in a whole variety of ways that would actually be really beneficial to the city. And that's one of them.
Okay, so my last question is really on leadership. What do you consider your two greatest strengths and your two greatest weaknesses? And as controller, how would you leverage your strengths and overcome your weaknesses?
I think it's probably a truism for most of us that our greatest strengths can be our greatest weaknesses sometimes, or our greatest challenges. So here are mine. I consider myself to be a very hardworking person, often way into the late hours of the night. I think that's a great strength, but I also need to know how to best delegate things and to work with a whole team of people, and that's something that I've done very effectively, but it remains a challenge when you want to know everything that's going on and when you want to have your finger and involvement in it all. And that dovetails, I think, being very detail-oriented. I am very much into very specific details a lot of the time. I think you have to have that in order to be a controller, but you also have to be able to look at the big picture at the same time. And that's a balancing act that has to be done by, I think, anybody in any office, be it controller or anything else. So that's how I seek to balance those and leverage them.
So you're going to, if elected as controller, you will manage an office of up to 20 people.
No, much more than that.
Oh,
That's the one
Because-
he can appoint.
Right, that's
those-
correct.
How many
Yes.
people are in the controller's office?
There are about 165.
And how many, so in your experience, what's the largest staff that you've managed?
Well, I've been involved in a lot of different businesses, both managing staff directly and indirectly. Now, a lot of the civil service staff, when it comes to the controller's office, it actually works pretty well and has been relatively well managed. Much of what the controller spends a lot of time with is those kinds of audits and those kinds of operations that are separate from the production of those paychecks and production of the other kinds of payments that are made by the city.
Okay, so I want to now, thank you, Ron. I want to turn the meeting to Gary and Rafer and Beverly, and you have a special,
Betsy.
Betsy, I'm sorry.
Turn over to Betsy.
That's,
Well, no, Rafer was gonna.
well, decide.
Thank you very much for giving us the time, and I'll just, for about a second background, we're officers in the San Fernando Valley Fair Housing Council. We've been performing work over the years. I think I've been president for 10 years. Just in recent years, we have done the work. We've submitted those performances, and it's been up to as much as a year that we get paid for a specific month and a specific bill. We consequently get deeper and deeper in debt because the city doesn't get the money to the San Fernando Valley. And so that's the package. And our question, I guess, would be, after my wife gives you some more facts, is how do we clear that backlog up of either, well, at least making it a less amount of time than you get your money. And we think it should definitely be less than 6-7 months.
Basically, Rafer kind of said everything I was gonna say, but the LA Housing Department, we're in the valley, but it still relates to you also because Fair Housing, and I prepared something if you're interested in what we do. The city of Los Angeles has to always provide fair housing services to the west side all over the city. But we happen to be in the San Fernando Valley, but our situation, as Rafer said, we could perform work, let's say in March of last year, and 9 months later is when we get reimbursed by the LA Housing Department. I mean, what entity can operate like that? There's no way. We're a nonprofit organization of people trying to help people to make sure they're not discriminated against and help them if they have an issue based on their race, their sexual orientation, whatever. So because of this time lapse of often 9 months of being reimbursed, you know, we owe over $100,000 in taxes. There are vendors we haven't been able to pay. I mean, it's absolutely absurd. So I guess our question to you, Ron, would be, if you're elected city controller, what would you do to investigate or look into this situation? I'm sure we're not the only organization with this issue, but we're going under, and we've existed for over 50 years helping people, and because of this problem, you know, we're in trouble.
And they serve the underserved.
Yeah, and so it's like, okay, for you as controller, what would you do to look into this, to see, to rectify it, and to see that it also does not happen to other organizations?
Thank you.
Couple things. First of all, what an awful situation this is, especially for you who are really trying to serve as Marcia said, the underserved. And unfortunately, when it comes to the housing department, there's been a number of audits. There have been so many complaints. Every day I hear complaints about the operation of that particular department, which I think needs some rethinking and some serious, not just auditing, but some serious rethinking.
Overhaul, take
and
over.
Overhaul. My question, though, specifically about this is, when you actually have these invoices, do you send them to the city, or do you send them, you are a subcontractor, you're not the contractor.
No.
So do you send them to the city, or do you send them to
We send them
your
to the
contractor?
subcontractor that the city has subcontracted with them, who then subcontracts with us. So we send it to this Housing Rights Center, who then sends it on to the city. I'm not blaming the city completely. There's this, you know, organization in between.
And who is supposed to issue you the check? Is it the city that issues you the check, or the contractor that you are a sub of?
The contractor that we are a sub
Okay.
of. So, but it has to go from us to this
So there's
subcontractor to the city,
links in this
who
chair.
then comes back. But the bottom line is, it takes 9 months, something's wrong.
Well, it sounds to me that the real problem in this case, although there certainly are problems with the city and with the housing department, the real problem is with this particular contractor of the city that is not taking those bills that you are submitting to the contractor and paying you. And they may very well be in violation of their own contract and agreement with the city in the way that they are conducting themselves. So that's one thing that needs to be looked at. But give me some of these, you've given me some details, but I'm going to be happy to look into this for you and see what can be done about this.
We've done spreadsheets on the whole thing, and they're equally at fault. In other words, they may take 3 or 4 months to submit, and then it takes 6 months to come back again. So it's a 9-month process, and they're both at fault. And I can provide you with all the spreadsheets, they're all done.
Okay.
Do you know when the contract is up?
Well, the city, the RA that we've subcontracted with has said March 31st, which is past.
Okay.
They've done away with our contract, but they have no plans to implement.
Okay,
How
so-
are they?
Well, there are a
This-
lot of
this has to
contracts
go
that I've seen.
offline. This
Yeah.
is- Okay, so we're gonna set that aside.
Okay.
You guys now have met, and Ron's connected to these other commissions, so maybe he can help you with that.
I'm happy to help in any way that I
Ron,
can.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, sure. Stan, did you have a question?
What real authority does your office have and you have?
The question was about what real authority the controller's office has. Well, first of all, the controller, and it's spelled out, has the obligations, of course, to issue certain kind of reports and to oversee the issuance of those reports, audits, etc., financial documents as well as other things, and has authority to get all of the various kinds of documents and has authority to really compel the departments to cooperate. Having said that, I believe in many ways that power is not just so much always given, but dare I say, occasionally it's taken. I found when I was chair of the Commission on Revenue Efficiency, on paper I had zero authority at all, zero. And yet I was able to get departments to hand over documents, and I was able to get them to come to meetings and to open up their books on a variety of different things, to issue us reports that summarized more accurately things that they have been doing and not doing, to work with them to actually see some changes implemented. And that was with zero authority, but it was really sort of color of authority, as it were. So I think it's not so much the authority that you have on paper, but it's the authority sometimes that you take, and that you take in a good way. because if you don't do it, then it's a vacuum that will just get filled by somebody else or something that just doesn't get done.
But if
So-
if a department comes to you, whatever it may be, and says, we're gonna buy $100 million worth of new vehicles, and those vehicles are not necessary, do you have the authority to stop that?
Well, it's the city council that, in most cases, is going to vote for the authorization for that, or you've got certain proprietary departments that have certain kinds of authority to do that. To just say, no, I'm stopping the check, there are circumstances in which that is possible, but that's not necessarily in the final analysis going to get it stopped, because it's a public policy issue that is not the controller to decide whether that's money being well spent or not. If there's clear evidence of, say, fraud that has occurred, or other circumstances that can make you stop that, at least in the interim, that's one thing. But if it's just that I don't think it's a good use of money, I can point that out. But to actually stop that payment is a different story.
We're going to publish the power and duties of the controller in the newsletter.
What I'm wondering is, where is the oversight in the purchasing of, because I see so much waste in my mind, okay, as an ex-business person, that it seems ludicrous, okay? So, is there any oversight whatsoever of that department saying, we're gonna buy those vehicles, and they don't really need those vehicles?
Well, it's very difficult for the controller to assess the need of every single department and every single expenditure, and whether that's a reasonable or a necessary expenditure or not. And there are often a variety of parties that are going to argue, hey, we really need this, and without it, we cannot function. That's different than the role of the controller, which can say, okay, you're buying these vehicles, you're paying X amount of dollars, but all these other jurisdictions are paying Y amount of dollars, which is significantly less. Why are we paying more for these vehicles? Or looking at those vehicles and stating, well, we have X number of vehicles already, they're being used at such and such a rate, do we actually need those? That you can do in the function of an audit, but to say I'm stopping payment on it because I don't think it's needed is a different situation.
Nikki, did you have a question?
Yeah, Ron, what is your position on Prop 13, and does actually the controller have authority, and specifically the residential portion?
Prop 13, I continue to support Prop 13 specifically and most notably when it comes to residential property owners. There are some interesting things though, however. One of the issues that I've worked on a lot is documentary transfer tax. Not the sexiest of subjects, but one that's been really interesting to me. And that's when you transfer property, and when you've got a deed as a precondition to recordation at the county recorder's office, the documentary transfer tax has to be paid. But what we've had is a situation with a lot of properties, notably commercial properties, that are owned in an entity, XYZ LLC, for example. And then when you are acquiring that property, there is no deed that gets recorded, but rather you are just acquiring an ownership interest in that LLC. And therefore, there is nothing that goes through the county recorder's office. And therefore, that documentary transfer tax is not collected. I could spend a couple of hours just on this whole subject. But I got very interested in this, and I've worked actually with the county and with the city on it, and it has resulted in actually a report that was just issued by the county of about $5 million more that has been collected because of specific things that I put in place to actually capture some of those transactions that don't get recorded, to make sure that they don't fly fully under the radar and that we can collect that money. And I believe we can get a lot more out of that. But there's a whole interesting subject of what to do with those kind of properties.
Yeah, well, I can tell you that a residential sale of property and purchase of property, you pay that tax. I can verify that firsthand.
Not if it's an LLC.
Not if it's an LLC,
No,
but if you buy it personally,
Definitely you do, and
Yes.
sometimes they're raising the rates.
or if a trust buys it,
Right.
Right,
whatever.
but the LLCs are not being recorded, and it's just killing us on the corridor because it's showing lower values of our condominiums, and it's really rampant.
One of the things I've asked for is that there has to be certain kinds of documents that are filed when more than a 50% interest or cumulatively more than a 50% interest is transferred in an LLC that actually holds real property. And those documents have to be filed with the Franchise Tax Board, and I've sought for the city to be getting on an ongoing basis those kinds of documents so that we too can actually have notice of that happening for properties within the city of Los Angeles.
With foreclosures that they had to record, but it hasn't hit the people with these individual LLCs, and anybody can go get an LLC.
Yeah.
And it's really a big problem.
Okay. All right, so we're gonna, we'll take Roberta's question and Marcy's question, and then Nucci, if you wanted to say something, I don't know why you're here, but we welcome you.
Can you listen?
Okay.
Marcia, this was on the
My question first.
Okay.
Is that okay? Okay, well, Ron, first of all, I think you did a great job. It's obviously that you've been really studying these issues and you have not only the superficial but also the deep knowledge and also hopefully the guts to take on this job and be out there and be a person who's going to fight for us, because it's really discouraging being in this city right now. I don't need to list all the discouraging
Okay,
things.
is there a question in there, Roberta?
There is, in a minute, or less. But, so you get into office, let's just assume, and the mayor's new, has to be, okay, and the controller's new, and we don't know about the city attorney. How are you going to come out with your plans, or what will be your plans for maybe the first year of office? What will be the most important targets that you will pinpoint?
Great question about what the most important targets are going to be, and I touched on this a little bit earlier. But first of all, and I also mentioned this in the application as well, the administrative code clearly states that among the audits that has to be done and that have particular timelines are the industrial, economic, and administrative surveys of the city's three proprietary departments. The ones that are up and due for being redone are the DWP and the airports. And they have to be done by a certain kind of deadline, or else I'll find myself in violation of the law, and I don't particularly relish that thought. So then that's one. The other is to really take stock of where we have been with the audits that are underway, as well as recently completed ones, to make sure that the ones that have been completed are actually getting implemented and moving through the system. It should be noted, by the way, that most of the audits go through the Audits and Governmental Efficiency Committee of the City Council, which has recently been chaired by Mr. Zine, which is where a lot of these audits have gone to die, and that is very unfortunate, but that is going to change with a change of leadership that is inevitable in that committee. And also, it is looking at what I have identified as being sort of the most important places where we can get money, the ones that were identified in the Commission on Revenue Efficiency reports, that also the Inspector General has been working on, particularly as it relates to, as I mentioned, assets and procurement, and looking for the really big amounts, because there's some of these audits that have been done that are great, but they, in the final analysis, even if we manage to implement everything, we're not going to get a lot of money out of it. And that shouldn't be the only basis to do an audit, but right now, when we're facing the financial problems that we're facing, I think those have to be at the top of the list.
Marcy?
Well, this went back to the property transfer tax.
Yes.
Is it still on the table that it's slated to be doubled?
No.
Because Santa Monica does not pay a city tax, West Hollywood does not pay a city tax, and we do, and we pay a significant tax already.
So
Yeah.
it's all, that's
You know,
not,
everybody pays the county tax.
there was a real uproar on that.
Yeah, actually the proposal was to significantly increase the documentary transfer tax, which we already have the second highest documentary transfer tax anywhere in the state of California. And this was proposed at a time when, quite frankly, the real estate market has just sort of begun to come out of a lot of problems. And I opposed that, and I opposed it rather vehemently, and will continue to do so.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming. And Lucy, you passed out the questionnaires, so if everyone could complete their questionnaire, that would be really great, and then we'll pick them up. Nuge, did you want to have anything to say? Or you want to...
I'll just conclude by saying thank you very, very much for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for everybody who's coming here. There's so many things we could be doing this morning. And the fact that you're you're here is a great testament to how much passion and how much care there is for a lot of what is happening in the city of LA. And we're lucky to have you.
Thank you for your knowledge. I have to second what Roberta said, because really, it's refreshing to hear the depth of knowledge and understanding the overall, but also understanding the details. So that was very refreshing.
Thanks. And I'm happy to talk about them and to come back as the next LA City Controller.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nooch, do you want to?
I'll tell you about
Wait 1 second, Gary. Gary, wait 1 second. Gary, wait 1 second.
Good to see you, sir. How are you?
All right, I can-
Excellent.
You can help as controller by your submit.
Okay.
That's holding up the.
Okay. Okay, so what would you like to tell us?
Well,
Okay, Gary? Okay.
I'm sure that you've all heard the news reports on Billboard.
Yes.
I'm going to harken back to 2009. We weren't here, we were at your house at your table. And I invite you to go to, I think it's on YouTube, and take a look at what I said when I was running for city attorney.
You predicted it.
And at the time, there were illegal super graphics, static boards, and digital boards that were approved by my predecessor. I had made a promise to you that I would go after them. Since we've been there, we haven't lost I don't think, an issue on billboards. Yesterday, you'll notice that 2 weeks ago I had a press conference where I went out in front of a billboard, and everybody was telling me, shut them down, shut them down, shut them down. Well, I could have done that 2 weeks ago. But what would have happened is that I would have invited a lawsuit and opened up this whole can of worms again. Because it would have been a discretionary action by the city as opposed to an action ordered by the judge. So I took what I thought was a more strategic avenue and fashioned an order to the judge to instruct us to do something, which takes the legs out from their argument that it's discretionary. And the judge fashioned an order yesterday and has reserved 20 boards for individual scrutiny, which we'll look at next Wednesday. And 77 boards that are lit right now in the city will be shut down by 5 o'clock on Friday. Not on Monday, I'm sorry, on 5 o'clock on Monday. And there's 3 boards that permits were issued for that were never actually put up. So by hopefully next Friday, there will not be one digital board in LA that was part of that unholy agreement that took place back in 2006.
Wow, and we thank you for that. We really do.
Wow.
Yeah.
Are they going to publish a list of the ones to be shut down?
Yeah, there is a list published.
I mean,
Now, you got to be careful, because if you listened to what the billboard companies said, they are going to go back and try to have those permits renewed via the council.
Oh, do that? Can they do that?
Sure they can.
So that the
I
law.
mean, what you need, honestly, here is, I've recommended that we put together a citizens committee. Look at, this is a really complicated issue. And it involves more than just digital signs. It involves city revenues. It involves light pollution. There's a whole, I've learned more about billboards than I've ever wanted to know in my life. But I know billboards now, and I know it very, very well. There's an answer to this. All of you here have flat screen TVs in your home, correct? The industry is moving in that direction. Every city is moving in that direction. LA is going to move in that direction, but we can't move the way we've moved. We've moved without listening to the people that we're serving. The neighborhood councils have to become part of this discussion. And the biggest thing that has to happen, I think, in the next 10 years in the city of LA is that neighborhood councils have to be more empowered by the city. There's been, since its inception, and it came out of the secession movement, there's been a move, maybe up until the last few years, last couple of years, members as a non-voting position in all commissions. So that we have, I'm sure that's going to get, I'm going to make a lot of friends with that, I can tell you that right now.
Other members?
No, but not one, but I mean, just one person selected by the council, neighborhood councils.
Okay, then it's only 100.
But I mean,
Well, there's 100 neighborhood councils.
yeah, but there's only one person that they select
Oh.
to sit on, so we have 105 commissions or whatever it is we have. They put a person on each commission, and that person reports back to the neighborhood councils, so that we have some transparency on what goes on these commissions. And that way, it gives neighborhood councils their role to advise the council, because that's the role of neighborhood, by charter. I mean, it's not that you guys are a club that are just hanging out. The charter of the city of Los Angeles empowers you to a certain role. And so, your charter created, and your charter mandated. And when the city acts in a way to pull the rug out from underneath the neighborhood councils, the city acts illegally. And so we need to make sure that the city acts in a manner that's fashioned more towards the spirit of the law. You know, that's the hard part of the job that the controller may do and the city attorney may do. And that is, if you have to, there's no way of doing this job without stepping on toes, if you do it right. Because your job is to be, basically my job is to be the policeman. I can't sue my client, but I can tell my client, you know, what the law is. They don't, and they can waive the attorney-client privilege, and then I can talk about what my advice is. But unless they waive it specifically, and that's why when you have discussions with the council, you can always ask them, wait, why don't you waive the attorney-client privilege so that we can see what the advice was and whether or not you're following the advice of the city attorney. Now, but I can't ask them to waive it. The privilege belongs to the client, and that's the rules of professional conduct. That's not the city council rules. That's not the charter rules. That's the state law of professional conduct that requires that type of non-disclosure. But when it comes to digital boards, we've had victories along the path, and we are on the road to victory, but we're not there yet. This is a discussion, folks, that those boards, you know, it's a flick of the switch that turns them off, and it's a flick of the switch that turns them back on. And depending on the stance and the policy of the person that's sitting in my seat, you know, I'm pretty clear. I've ticked off Clear Channel, I've ticked off CBS and Regency. And Brian's a friend of mine, don't get me wrong. He's a trustee at USC. He's a big backer of the football team. I used to be the lawyer for the football team at USC. So, I mean, at the end of the day, to sit there in a meeting with him and have him call me names is not easy. But the bottom line is that the job of the city attorney is to make the rules and to follow the rules. And you'll see that we've done it. And there's been no ethics violations by the city attorney, and everybody in the world has alleged them, you know, because they want to stop what we're doing, and we're going to continue to fight on this issue of billboards. It's a big issue, and if we do it right, there's a potential. Just using AEG as an example, I got my butt kicked in the council on AEG. We have a ban on billboards. AEG got 6 or 7 digital billboards across there. They pay $1 billion in revenue those billboards make. $1 billion a year. Not a million. Billion. Billion. If we were to take 20% of the revenue from those boards as part of their permitting and structure a law that doesn't violate the First Amendment, you know, tax on speech, our budget would be balanced right now. We have a vehicle to get there. We need to get there. There's a whole lot of things happening, you know, in terms of, you know, budgeting that would make this city whole. A year and a half ago, I went to the mayor and a couple of the council people with an idea that Obama now is running with on cap and trade, and I've seen no action. We could put in something that would, you know, literally fixed the city financially for years with no action. Because it's novel, it's different. But our president seems to think it's worthwhile. And we did it a year and a half ago, I had this idea.
So how do you explain their lack of doing anything?
You know, what I found in my tenure there is that if you do nothing, you make no waves and you get reelected because people haven't heard anything about you. There's no reason to change. But if you open your mouth and you say this needs to be fixed, and again, I come from private industry. This is the novelty for me. I've done this for 3 years. If you target certain things, you become a target yourself. And so it's an interesting dynamic of what you need to do. If you want to change things, you have to do it by consensus. And it's difficult to get a consensus when your job is different than everybody else's. The council, it's easy to get a consensus. That's a policy. But when you're in the controller's office and you've got to say, I'm not. Remember Ira Reiner?
Yeah.
Okay. And he just refused to write checks. Okay. He wasn't very popular. He was popular with people, but he wasn't very popular. And that's exactly what, at the end of the day, when you stand out like that, you become a target. And you just need to make sure you're right when you do something.
Marlena?
Yeah.
Is it legal to have closed meetings after the meetings about the billboards?
As long as you're not in violation of the Brown Act, you can have any meeting you want. The problem is that you never hear about those closed meetings.
That's the problem.
That's right, and I don't
It's
hear about
after the fact.
That's well, for example, there's an ethics violation right now on my competitor. I heard of a commissioner asking a underling to do something, and other commissioners knew about it. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, don't we have the Brown Act in California? And I did a Public Information Act request, and there's no written document of any request at all for any kind of an opinion, which I don't know whether it occurred or it didn't occur to this point, but it sure warrants an investigation as to whether or not this city, and I can't do it because they're my client, whether or not this city is in compliance with the Brown Act.
Who can?
The district attorney, the controller probably could do it because they're not his client, but you can render subpoenas and things. It's an interesting issue. This is, very tangential, but what Rocky and Laura Chick went through. And Laura had the right idea, but Rocky was right on the law. The charter needs to be changed. But the question is, you're never going to get that charter changed without going to the public with it. You're never going to get the council support because people do not want themselves audited by another elected official because they become a target. Right now, I'll tell you what, you want to come in on the day after the election and audit my office? Have at it. I have the most well-run office right now that I think in the city. I've never had a budget number larger than my payroll, and yet we've balanced every single year. And we've done more with less and cut outside counsel. So, but there needs to be a charter change so that there has to be either an appointed committee or an elected committee to make sure that what you're talking about in terms of being, not wasting money, not making sure that they're competent in what they do occurs. Because the charter does not allow another elected official to audit. Not that I wouldn't want that. I'm the only elected official that's ever been audited by another elected official in the history of the city. But it needs to happen across the board. Because if there's no checks and balances on what you spend, our current controller is over budget 20%. Our council's over budget also. There's not one other elected official in 4 years who has met a budget. We've met our budget every single year, and it's been less than our payroll. And that has to happen. Everybody has to have their feet held to the fire. And the CAO should be that person, but unfortunately the CAO is appointed by the mayor.
Yeah. Well, these are the issues.
It's a structural problem how the city's organized.
These are the issues that we're facing. Do you want to take 60 seconds, say one last thing?
60 seconds, anybody got ideas what my 60 seconds should be?
Now, tell us about your campaign and what's happening.
Well, you know, I have to say, I was very disappointed in CD11 and CD5 results. I was extremely, because I lost in both districts. And in both of those districts, and I lost big in both those districts. In both those districts are the two districts that I think have helped the most in my tendency as city attorney. I couldn't believe it when I saw the results. I went, wow. I'm floored by that, because in the most help was CD11 and with billboards here in CD5. They've taken up a lot of my time. But, you know, at the end of the day, our campaign is, you know, look, I'm going to do my job until the last day. And, you know, if you look at just the sheer numbers of what we've done since we've been there, I think we've been the most effective city attorney probably in a long, long while. You know, the numbers now, on Monday I'm going to have a press conference. Our numbers now, based on last demands in terms of verdicts in court, is $300 million that we've saved in verdicts. $28 million in taxes collected. It's just surpassed everybody in the past. But yet, there's something that I guess I'm not doing. I don't know, maybe I'm not friends with everybody. I'm not here to be a friend. I'm here to do my job. When you hire a lawyer, you don't look for a guy that's going to be, you know, you want to know if you're going to win or not. And since we've been in office, we've been winning. And we've been winning in a way that's been good for the city of LA. And I'm looking at this, I'm going, when a guy does his job and he keeps his promise in terms of everything he said he was going to do, and if you look at that blueprint for change I passed out to you, every issue on that blueprint for change we've done, except for one. And this is where you can help us control it. One, and that is establish a Bureau of Investigation to stop the waste and abuse that's going out through workers' compensation fraud. Look at, we are wasting $100 million, I believe, in payouts on comp fraud. I had a fireman. If I wasn't watching an MMA fight, I had a fireman fighting who was on comp. We were paying him, and he was on comp at the time. The DA prosecuted him finally. We referred 15, 20 cases to the DA's office on cases that we believe are fraudulent, and we can't get a filing. We need investigators to do sub-rosas on we have a large contingent, over 10% on comp in our city. The average in the industry is 1%. Something's wrong, and we need to fix it. I see the problems. I can't get the help to fix it. I can't get an investigator because they're afraid that I'll turn the investigators on them. And they're my client. But that's how the city works. We need to fix it, and the only way you fix it is by investing. $1 million in payroll will fix a $100 million problem with cirrhosis on workers' compensation.
Okay, that's good information. Nuch, will you be here for a few minutes?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to close the meeting. He's here, Ron's here. Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.